The rain fell in sheets that November evening, turning the streets of New Horizon City into rivers of gray concrete. Vera wiped down the espresso machine for the 100th time that shift, her mind already at home, at the apartment she shared with her boyfriend Nathan, at the wine she'd promised herself, at the bed that had been calling her name since 4 a.m. She was 28, worked at Emmer Cafe on 5th Street, and had long ago made peace with the fact that her life would be ordinary. There were no grand adventures waiting for her, no plot twists, just rent, shifts, and the vague sense of treading water while the world moved on around her. The cafe was nearly empty. Mrs. Chun nursing her evening tea in the corner, her knitting needles clicking in hypnotic rhythm. A couple in their 60s holding hands, stealing glances like they'd just discovered each other. Vera envied that comfortable intimacy that had weathered decades. She and Nathan had been together 5 years, but lately something felt distant. He'd been working late more often. His phone buzzed with messages he read privately. Nothing was explicitly wrong, but nothing felt right either. She was closing up, keys already in hand, when she noticed him. He sat pressed against the glass exterior of the closed bookstore next door, hunched against the rain. His clothes hung in tatters, a coat that might have been navy blue once, now the color of old ash. His hair was matted, his beard thick and unkempt. A shopping bag beside him held nothing but damp newspaper. He was exactly the kind of person Vera usually walked past without seeing, the kind her city had perfected the art of invisible making. But something about his eyes caught her. Even from across the street, even in the fading November light and falling rain, she could see them. They weren't the hollow, vacant eyes of someone checked out from the world. These eyes were sharp, intelligent, and absolutely terrified. Vera stood frozen in the cafe doorway, rain beginning to soak through her cardigan. Every instinct told her to lock up and go home. Nathan would be waiting. She'd had a 12-hour shift. This wasn't her responsibility. People who ended up on streets had made choices, had fallen through cracks, had complicated stories that weren't her burden to carry. But her feet were already moving. "Hey!" she called out, crossing the street. Up close, he was older than she thought. Maybe 60, though his circumstances had clearly added years to his face. "You can't stay out here. You'll catch pneumonia." He looked up at her, and she saw a flash of something. Hope? Fear? Crossed his features before he shuddered it away. "I'm fine," he said. His voice was rough but articulate, each word carefully pronounced. Not the voice of someone who'd always lived on the streets. "You're soaking wet, and it's dropping below freezing tonight. Come inside. Just for a bit. I'll make you a hot drink." She could see him warring with himself. Pride versus necessity. Suspicion versus the simple human need for warmth. Finally, necessity won. He stood slowly, joints creaking, and followed her inside. She made him a bowl of the soup she'd been heating for a family meal, added 2 shots of espresso to a cup of hot milk, and set it in front of him at the corner table. He ate like someone who'd forgotten what hunger felt like, but whose body remembered perfectly well. Slowly at first, then with increasing urgency. "I'm Vera," she said, sitting across from him. "James," he said, after a pause that lasted too long. A lie. She thought automatically, though she said nothing. They sat in silence for a while, the only sound the occasional car hissing past outside. Up close, she could see the details she'd missed from across the street. His hands were clean, recently washed, she suspected. His nails were trimmed. He wore a watch that had stopped at 3:47. The face cracked, but the band still leather and well-maintained. These were the contradictions that made her stare. "Why did you stop?" he asked suddenly. "Most people don't." "I don't know," Vera admitted. "Something about your eyes. They didn't match the rest." She paused. "You weren't always living on the street." It wasn't a question. He looked at her for a long moment, and she watched internal calculation happen behind his eyes. Trust or deflect. Open or close. "No," he said finally. "I wasn't." But he didn't elaborate, and Vera didn't press. Instead, she found herself telling him about Nathan, about the distance that had been growing between them, about how she felt like she was performing a relationship rather than living in one. She talked about the job she planned to pursue after college, environmental science, and how she'd set it aside when money got tight. thinking it would be temporary. He listened with the kind of attention most people reserve for their phones. When she finally locked to the cafe that night, it was past midnight. James, or whoever he really was, dozed in the corner booth, wrapped in a blanket she brought from a back room. She'd left him enough cash on the table to get a night at the Red Door Motel down the block. On the train ride home, Vera realized something that should have terrified her. Her heart was racing in a way it hadn't in years. Not from fear, from curiosity, from the inexplicable feeling that her life had just shifted on its axis, and she had no idea which way it would fall. When she unlocked her apartment, Nathan was asleep on the couch, work files scattered across the coffee table. She stood in the darkness, looking at him, at the man she committed her life to, and felt the distance between them widen into something that felt like a chasm. She thought of those sharp, terrified eyes, of the feeling of being truly seen by another person, of the dangerous certainty that meeting James had changed something fundamental in her that could never be changed back. Vera told herself it was just kindness, just basic human decency. That was why she found herself at Ember Cafe the next evening, earlier than her shift started, with a bag containing a change of clothes, some hygiene items, and a sandwich wrapped in foil. James was there, sleeping on the bench where she'd left him, the cracked watch still circling his wrist like an anchor to a previous life. He woke when she sat beside him, his hand moving to his chest defensively before recognition softened his features. "You came back," he said. "Not a question. You need to get off the streets," Vera said, matching his matter-of-fact tone. "There's a shelter 2 blocks from here. The director is decent. He'll ask questions, but he won't hassle you. I told him someone was coming." "Why would you do that?" The wariness was back in his eyes. "Because I can," Vera said simply. "And because something tells me you're not the kind of person who should be sleeping on a bench." He looked at the bag she brought, at the clothes, at the sandwich, at her. "What do you want from me?" he asked. It was a fair question. The kind of question someone who'd lived on the streets would learn to ask before accepting anything from strangers. "The truth," Vera said, "or whatever version of it you're willing to give. That's all." For 3 days, she heard nothing. She showed up for her shifts, made drinks, smiled at customers, and felt like an actress in a play that was no longer holding her interest. Nathan texted twice to say he'd be working late. She didn't bother responding. On the 4th day, James came into the cafe during her shift. He was cleaner, his beard trimmed, his hair washed, wearing the clothes she brought him. He looked different, still marked by hardship, but reclaimed somehow. He sat in the back booth and ordered a black coffee. She brought it herself, sitting across from him despite her manager's disapproving look. "The shelter is good," he said. "The counselor's trying to set me up with a job at a warehouse. Sorting recycling. Minimum wage, but it's something." He paused. "They want to see me get my ID sorted out first." "That's good," Vera said. And she meant it, though she also felt a strange sense of disappointment. He was getting back on his feet. He'd have no reason to stay, to keep coming back to the cafe, to keep seeing her. "My name isn't James," he said quietly, glancing around to make sure no one was in earshot. "It's Adrian Kovac. And until 8 months ago, I was a senior scientist at Nexus Corporation." Vera's breath caught. Nexus Corporation. The mega-corporation that seemed to own half of New Horizon City, the pharmaceutical giant with the sleek silver towers downtown, the one that sponsored the city's arts programs and donated to every charity that mattered. "What happened?" she asked. Adrian took a long drink of his coffee before answering. "I was working on Project Helix. It was supposed to be a medical breakthrough, a treatment for degenerative neurological diseases. Parkinson's, dementia, ALS. The kind of thing that could have changed medicine forever." He paused, and she watched the weight of memories settle on his shoulders. But there were problems with the trials. Serious ones. Patients were developing secondary conditions, organ failure, stroke, fatal cardiac events. We reported it up the chain. I reported it myself multiple times. And each time, someone at the executive level buried it, changed the data, decided that the potential profits outweighed the danger to human lives. Vera felt her mouth go dry. "You tried to blow the whistle." "I did more than try," Adrian said. I took copies of all the documentation. The falsified reports, the internal emails, the approved protocols that violated every ethical standard in medicine. I went to the FDA. I went to the news. I was supposed to be protected under whistleblower laws. But you're not, Vera said, understanding dawning. You're here. Nexus has lawyers and connections and resources that dwarf anything the FDA could bring against them, Adrian said bitterly. They countersued me, claimed I'd stolen proprietary data, that I'd committed fraud, that I was unfit to practice science. They convinced the medical board to revoke my license while the case was under investigation. That investigation has been ongoing for 2 years. He ran his hand over his face. They made it so I couldn't practice, couldn't get hired anywhere legitimate, couldn't even rent an apartment because I had no employment. When my savings ran out, when my credit destroyed, when I had nowhere to go, he trailed off, the answer evident in his presence. Where's the evidence now? Vera asked, her mind already racing ahead, connecting dots. The documents you took. I hid them, Adrian said, in a safe place. But they're useless now. My legal team abandoned me when the money ran out. Without representation, without resources, I can't actually use them. Nexus owns a narrative. I'm just a bitter, mentally unstable former employee making wild accusations. Vera was quiet for a long moment. Then, what if they weren't useless? Adrian looked at her, and she saw hope flicker across his face, quickly suppressed, as if he learned not to let himself feel it anymore. What are you thinking? He asked carefully. I don't know yet, Vera admitted, but I'm a good researcher. I was going to study environmental science before I gave that up. And I know people, journalists, activists, people who spent their lives fighting corporate corruption. What if we could get them the evidence in a way that Nexus couldn't bury? Vera, no. Adrian shook his head sharply. You have a life, a boyfriend. You don't want to get involved with this. But even as he said it, she could see him hope lighting something behind his eyes that had been dark for a very long time. That night, she went home to the apartment, and Nathan, he was there for once, sitting at the kitchen table with his laptop open. She looked at him, really looked at him, and tried to remember the last time they'd had a real conversation. The last time he'd looked at her the way Adrian looked at her. I'm thinking of quitting the cafe, she said abruptly. Nathan barely glanced up. Okay, you want to go back to school? Maybe, Vera said. Or maybe something else. I don't know yet. Let me know when you figure it out, Nathan said, turning back to his laptop. She stood in the kitchen, watching him work, and felt the final thread connecting them snap. That night, she lay beside him in bed and made a decision that would change everything. She would help Adrian, not because it was safe or smart or convenient, but because for the first time in years, she felt like she was reaching towards something real, and because those sharp, terrified eyes had seen her more clearly than anyone else ever had. 3 weeks later, Vera sat in Adrian's new apartment, a small, sparse studio that was a vast upgrade from the shelter, and spread the documents across the kitchen table. She'd spend her nights after work scanning everything, creating digital backups, organizing the data into a narrative that even someone unfamiliar with neuroscience could understand. Adrian made tea while she worked, moving around the tiny kitchen with the careful precision of someone unaccustomed to having a space to move in. There was an intimacy to it. Not romantic, not yet, but something close. The intimacy of collaboration, of two people working towards something bigger than themselves. You should have been a lawyer, Adrian said, setting a cup beside her. I should have done a lot of things, Vera replied, not looking up from her work. But her voice wasn't bitter. Lately, she'd stopped thinking about her abandoned dreams and started thinking about her chosen present. She left Nathan 3 days ago. The conversation had been brief and, strangely, painless. He'd barely seemed to notice. She was leaving until she was actually walking out the door with her bags packed. Wait, he'd said, as if suddenly realizing something had changed. Is this about that guy? The one you keep mentioning. She'd told him the truth, not to hurt him, but because she'd learned from Adrian's experience from her own awakening, that living inside a lie was a kind of death. Now she was living in a short-term rental near Adrian's neighborhood, working double shifts at the cafe while pouring her evenings into building the case against Nexus. "I think we should approach Marcus Liu first," she said, pulling up her notes. "He's been investigating Nexus for 3 years. His last piece was about their environmental violations in South America, but he was blocked from publishing the follow-up. If we give him this, the science, the documentation, the human element, he'll know what to do with it." Adrian sat across from her, his face illuminated by the glow of the laptop screen. He'd started working at the warehouse, but Vera could see the purpose returning to him, the sense of meaning. She watched as he traced his finger down a page of his own handwriting from years past, back when he'd been Dr. Adrian Kovac, instead of just Adrian. "You know this is dangerous, right?" he said. It was the same thing he'd been saying, in various forms, for weeks. "Nexus doesn't take threats lightly. They'll come after you." "I know," Vera said. She did know. She'd researched Nexus's history of litigation, their aggressive legal tactics, the whistleblowers they destroyed through courts and public relations campaigns. She considered the risk and decided it was worth taking. What she hadn't calculated was how quickly the risk would become personal. It happened on a rainy Thursday, almost exactly 1 month after she stopped to offer James, Adrian, a cup of coffee. She was closing the cafe when a man in an expensive suit came in with 2 others flanking him like parentheses around a sentence. "Vera Castillo?" he said. It wasn't a question. Her heart stopped. "Yes. I'm Edward Walsh, representing Nexus Corporation. I'd like to discuss your recent activities before they escalate into something regrettable." His smile was perfectly polite and absolutely threatening. "You've been helping Adrian Kovac assemble proprietary information belonging to Nexus. That's theft and corporate espionage. We're prepared to go to the authorities, or we're prepared to make you an offer." Vera's mind raced. How had they found out so quickly? She'd been so careful, using encrypted devices, untraceable phones. "I want to speak to a lawyer," she said, keeping her voice steady. "A lawyer might advise you that you're in a very difficult position," Walsh said pleasantly. "You're unemployed, living alone, with no assets and increasing debts. A criminal charge would destroy you, but we're reasonable people. Convince Mr. Kovac to cease his activities. Help us recover the documentation. And we can make all of this go away. We might even be generous about payment. And if I don't," Vera asked, though she already knew the answer, "then we destroy you," Walsh said simply. "Not out of spite, just as a matter of necessity. You understand." She understood. That night, she sat in Adrian's apartment and told him everything. She expected him to tell her to back out, to protect herself. Instead, she watched his jaw set in a way she'd never seen before. "We accelerate," he said. "We approach Marcus tomorrow. We don't care about Nexus's threats anymore, because we're not hiding anymore. Once the story is public, they can't touch us without proving everything we're saying is true." "Adrian," Vera started. He took her hands. "I've been living in fear for 3 years. It's broken me, made me invisible. But meeting you, having someone believe me, having someone help me, it's made me remember who I am. I'm not ready to go back into hiding. Are you?" She looked at him. This man who'd been homeless weeks ago, who'd suffered professional destruction, who'd maintained his integrity through impossible circumstances. And she realized she loved him. Not the dramatic, swept-away love of movies, but the deep, grounded love that comes from truly knowing someone, from choosing them again and again, even when it would be easier not to. "No," she whispered. "I'm not." He kissed her then, and it felt like breaking through the surface of water after drowning. It felt like coming home. Later, as they lay tangled in his narrow bed, Adrian's hand tracing lazy patterns on her shoulder, Vera allowed herself to feel the full weight of what they were about to do. In 48 hours, they would meet with Marcus Liu. In a week, they would likely be at the center of Firestorm. Nexus was worth billions. They had resources that dwarfed anything she and Adrian could muster. They would fight, and it would be dirty. But as Adrian's breathing slowed into sleep beside her, Vera felt something she hadn't felt in years. not just purpose, but certainty. She was exactly where she needed to be, doing exactly what needed to be done, even if it burned everything else away. Marcus Liu's office was in a basement, literally and figuratively speaking. His independent news platform, Truth Seeker, operated out of cramped space below a Vietnamese restaurant, and the smell of pho seemed permanently embedded in the walls. He was older than Vera expected, maybe 60, with reading glasses on a chain and an expression of someone who'd spent decades separating signal from noise. He listened to Adrian for 2 hours without interrupting once. Just listened and took notes, and asked precise questions that revealed a journalist's understanding of both science and corruption. When Adrian finished, Marcus removed his glasses and cleaned them slowly on his shirt. "This is," he said carefully, "potentially the most significant corporate malfeasance case I've ever seen. Do you understand what that means?" "That Nexus will deny everything?" Adrian asked. "That Nexus will deny everything and have their lawyers tie us up in court for years and try to discredit both of you utterly," Marcus said. He looked at Vera. "You especially, Miss Castillo. They'll say you're in a relationship with him, that you're biased, that you're helping him pursue a vendetta. They'll find every mistake in your research, and there will be mistakes, because you're not a professional researcher, and they'll magnify them into proof of incompetence or bias. They'll try to make you look like a girlfriend helping her boyfriend get revenge, not a serious person concerned with public health. So you won't publish it?" Adrian asked, disappointed. "I didn't say that," Marcus said. He stood and walked to a filing cabinet, pulling out a thick folder. "This is the Helix Project. What I've been able to gather from Freedom of Information requests, leaked emails, and interviews with people willing to go on record. It's not complete. It's not enough on its own. But combined with what you have..." He spread the documents across the table. Vera leaned forward, looking at his assembled narrative, at the pieces she and Adrian had added, at how they fit together into something undeniable. "We can do this," Marcus said. "But we do it right. We have every detail verified by independent physicians and ethicists. We go through their claims and defuse them before they make them. We build such an ironclad case that if they try to come after us legally, they'll have to defend the merits of what they did, not just attack us personally." He looked directly at Adrian. "And you need to be willing to put your name to this, to let them know it's you. Your credibility as the insider is crucial." Adrian nodded slowly. "Nexus has already been coming after me. What difference does it make if I'm public?" "It makes all the difference," Marcus said. "Because right now you're the boogeyman. They can paint however they want. Once you're a real person, with a real story, with real documentation, they have to reckon with the truth, which is dangerous, but it's also powerful." Over the next 3 weeks, Vera worked with Marcus on verification. She learned more about neuroscience than she thought possible, tracked down independent researchers who were willing to review Adrian's data, conducted interviews with trial participants who'd been harmed or whose loved ones had been harmed. She barely slept. She and Adrian existed in a state of carefully controlled urgency, aware that Nexus's legal team was circling, that the company was clearly consolidating their defense. Nexus tried everything. They offered Marcus's outlet a bribe, which he recorded and documented. They threatened legal action, claiming defamation before anything was even published. They dug into Adrian's personal history, leaked rumors about his mental stability, his gambling debts, his divorce. They called Vera an opportunistic girlfriend taking advantage of a mentally unstable man's delusions. None of it worked, because they were trying to discredit the narrative before the evidence was public. And once the evidence was public, the narrative changed. The article dropped on a Tuesday morning, spread across Truth Seeker's platform in a format that was exhaustive and undeniable. 60 pages of documentation, expert testimony, and Adrian's personal account. Video interviews with trial participants. Chart after chart showing how Nexus had falsified data. Email chains revealing the exact moment executives had decided that profit mattered more than human lives. Within 4 hours, it had been shared by every major news outlet in the country. Within 24 hours, Nexus's stock price had dropped 40%. Within a week, federal agencies had opened investigations. Within a month, the company was in free fall. Adrian gave interviews. He was nervous at first, But Vera watched him settle into the role of speaking truth. His voice steadied, his shoulders straightened, and he began to look less like a homeless man and more like what he actually was, a scientist who'd sacrificed everything to protect human lives. He became famous. Not the kind of fame he'd had as a respected researcher, but something rawer and more powerful. He was the whistleblower, the one who'd had to live on the streets because the system was broken, the David standing against Nexus's Goliath. But fame was strange and not entirely welcome. One evening, about 6 weeks after the article published, Vera and Adrian were eating dinner at a small restaurant when people began recognizing him. Phone cameras emerged. Someone asked for a selfie. A woman approached their table with tears in her eyes, telling Adrian that he'd saved her sister's life by preventing her from enrolling in a trial that would have killed her. Later, back at Adrian's apartment, Adrian sat on the edge of the bed, looking hollowed out. "I don't want to be famous," he said. "I just wanted the truth to come out." Vera sat beside him, taking his hand. "I know. And now I'm the face of this whole thing, and people want something from me, and I'm terrified of letting them down." He turned to look at her. "Did you know that 3 universities have offered me positions? Research positions, with funding. The thing I thought I'd never have again." "That's good," Vera said gently. "Isn't it?" "It's everything I wanted when I was fighting this alone," Adrian said. "But now I just want things to be normal with you. I want to take you to dinner, without everyone staring. I want to go to bed without thinking about how many people are depending on me to be a hero." Vera pulled him close, and he rested his head on her shoulder. "You're not a hero," she said softly. "You're just a person who told the truth. And I'm a person who helped you do it. We're not obligated to save the world. We just had to save each other first." He was quiet for a long moment. Then, "I love you." It was the first time either of them had said it directly. "I love you, too," Vera replied, and meant it with every cell of her being. 6 months later, Vera stood in the observation room of Adrian's new lab at Columbia University, watching him work. He moved with a purposefulness and grace that reminded her of a dancer, each motion precise, intentional, exactly what the moment required. The research was different now. Instead of fighting corporate greed, he was pursuing pure science, a new treatment for neurological disease, developed with full ethical oversight and transparency. He'd been offered positions at 5 universities. He'd chosen Columbia not for prestige, but because they'd offered him complete autonomy over his research, and because New York felt like a fresh start. For both of them, Vera had used the severance package Nexus had been forced to pay out, part of their legal settlement, to go back to school. She was working toward her degree in environmental science, but she discovered an unexpected passion: corporate accountability and ethics. She'd been interviewed by several nonprofits interested in hiring her, and she was considering a position with an organization that helped other whistleblowers navigate the dangerous terrain she and Adrian had crossed. But first, they'd given themselves permission to just live. They'd rented a small house in a neighborhood in Brooklyn with actual trees and a yard. Adrian was planting a garden. Vera was adopting a dog. They were doing the kinds of normal things that people in love did, the kinds of things that had felt impossible when they were fighting for survival. Adrian finished his work and pulled off his latex gloves, giving her a smile through the glass that made her feel the way she'd felt that first night he'd kissed her, like she was breaking through water into air. They walked through the campus as the sun began to set, Adrian's hand finding hers with the ease of habit. They'd been living together for 3 months now, and it still felt new, still felt like a gift. "I've been thinking about something," Adrian said as they walked. "When this first happened, when Nexus came after us, I was so focused on the fight that I didn't really think about what would happen if we won. And now," Vera asked. "Now I'm thinking about the future," Adrian said. "I'm thinking about how I want to build something with you. Something beyond just surviving, beyond fighting. Something that's ours." He pulled her to a bench overlooking the campus, waiting for a couple of students to pass before continuing. "I want to ask you something," he said, and there was a nervousness in his voice that made Vera's heart skip. He pulled a small box from his jacket pocket. "I know we've only been together for 8 months. I know we met in the most unconventional way possible. I know neither of us planned this. But I spent 3 years watching the life I thought I'd have fall apart. And then you stopped and you saw me, and you refused to let my story be over. He opened the box. The ring was simple, a band of white gold with a small diamond. Elegant and understated. Perfect. Vera Castillo, will you marry me? She said yes before he could even finish the question. She kissed him, right there on the bench, and didn't care that students were walking past and probably recognizing them and probably filming. That night, they celebrated with Thai food and cheap champagne in their small house, sitting on the floor of the empty living room because they hadn't bought furniture yet and didn't need it. Adrian told her about his plans for the research, the potential breakthroughs, the conferences where he wanted to present, the idea he had for a foundation to help other researchers maintain integrity against corporate pressure. Vera told him about the job offer she'd finally decided to accept. The nonprofit wanted her as their director of investigation and accountability. We're going to be busy, Adrian said, pulling her close. Busy is good, Vera replied. Busy means we're building something. They made love on a blanket on the living room floor, and it felt different than before. Less like an escape, less like a rebellion against their circumstances, and more like a confirmation. Yes, this, us, forever. Afterward, lying with her head on Adrian's chest, listening to his heartbeat, Vera found herself thinking back to that cold November night when she'd stopped for a stranger who looked terrified. She'd expected nothing from that moment. It was just a coffee, just a small kindness in a world that rarely paused for such things. She had no idea it would cost her a boyfriend, put her at odds with a megacorporation, dismantle the life she thought she wanted. But it had also given her this man, this purpose, this love that felt deeper and more real than anything she'd ever experienced. What are you thinking about? Adrian asked, running his fingers through her hair. That night, she said, when I brought you inside. That night changed everything, Adrian agreed. I was so ordinary before, Vera said. Working a cafe job, going through the motions. And you were broken but so alive, so real. Meeting you was like waking up. Adrian lifted her chin so he could look into her eyes. You know what you were? You were brave. You just didn't know it yet. Everyone else walked past me. But you stopped. You saw a person where they saw a problem. That took courage. So did trusting me, Vera said, when you had every reason not to. I knew, Adrian said, the moment you came back the next day, that you were different, that this was different. I just didn't know it would end up like this. Like what? Vera asked, though she thought she knew. Like happy, Adrian said simply. After everything, the accusations of homelessness, the fight against Nexus, all of it, I didn't think I'd ever be happy again. I thought happiness was something that happened to people who hadn't been broken yet. But you broke me open and let something new grow. Over the following months, they built their life together with the same care and precision Adrian brought to his research. They furnished their house slowly, choosing pieces they both loved. They got the dog, a rescue terrier with one bent ear and permanent optimism. They took weekend trips to the beach, where Adrian collected smooth stones and Vera photographed the way light hit the water. Adrian's research began to yield results. The treatment showed significant promise in preclinical trials. Universities wanted to fund expanded studies. The foundation he started, the Kovac Institute for Ethical Innovation, was getting traction with young scientists who wanted to pursue discovery without compromising their integrity. Vera's work was changing lives in a quieter but equally profound way. She helped 5 other whistleblowers navigate their situations, providing both practical advice and emotional support. She knew exactly how terrifying it was to stand against powerful institutions, and she knew that having one person who believed in you, who stood beside you, could change everything. A year after Adrian proposed, they were married in a small ceremony in their backyard. Mrs. Chun from the cafe attended, as did Marcus Liu and his wife. Adrian's mother came, finally reconnecting with the son she thought she'd lost to the streets. Vera's family was there, including Nathan, who'd moved on, who'd found someone who wanted a quiet, ordinary life Vera had realized she didn't want after all. In the moment before they exchanged vows, Adrian pulled Vera aside. I want to tell you something, he said. On the night I was on that street, on the night before you found me, I was seriously considering ending it. Not just life on the streets. Life itself. I thought I had nothing left to live for. That I destroyed my career, my reputation, my future, and for what? The truth nobody wanted to hear. He took her hands. But then you came, and you saw me, and you refused to let that be the end of my story. You changed the trajectory of my life. Not just with the evidence you helped me gather, or the fight we fought together, though those matter, but just by showing me that someone could see the real me, that I wasn't invisible. Vera felt tears streaming down her face. You saved me, Adrian continued, not from poverty or homelessness. Though you helped with that, you saved me from despair, from giving up. You reminded me that my life had value. And you showed me, Vera said, her voice breaking, that I had courage, that I could do things I never thought I was capable of, that an ordinary life doesn't have to be my only option. They exchanged vows written by their own hands, spoke promises that acknowledged the unconventional start to their love story, the danger they'd faced together, the transformation they'd undergone. As the sun set over their Brooklyn garden, surrounded by the people who mattered most to them, Adrian and Vera became husband and wife. Later, as they danced to music playing from a speaker while their guests cheered, Vera looked up at Adrian and thought about how chant encounters could redirect an entire life, how one moment of compassion could ripple forward, changing not just two lives, but the lives of countless people who would benefit from Adrian's research, from the systems they were helping to build. She thought about all the other people still being passed by, still being made invisible. She'd already started talking to Marcus about doing regular investigative pieces on corporate corruption. She connected with other organizations working toward accountability. She and Adrian were planning to use a foundation to fund research only for scientists who were willing to maintain their ethical standards. There was still so much work to do, but now she did it beside someone who understood, someone who walked the fire with her, someone who'd learned, as she had, that the most transformative things often came when you stopped walking past and started paying attention. "Thank you," Adrian whispered, spinning her slowly beneath the strings of lights they'd hung through the garden. "For what?" Vera asked, though she knew. "For stopping," he said. "For seeing me, for refusing to let this story be a tragedy." She kissed him, and in that kiss was every moment they'd shared. The soup and the coffee, the documents spread across tables, the threats and the fear, the love that had grown between them precisely because they dared to stand for something that mattered. "Always," she said, "I'll always stop for you." And as the night deepened around them and the garden filled with laughter and music and light, they were no longer the invisible man and the ordinary woman. They were simply two people who'd found each other in the darkness and had chosen to build something beautiful in the light.